All right, young people, let's talk about the end of part 3 of All the Pretty Horses. We are going to focus today primarily on the idea of a significant event in the plot and the explanation of a function of a metaphor. But I think there's only one place to start with Rollins' question that they put Mexican blood in him. Does that mean he's part Mexican? It's a funny moment in the book. But to Rollins, blood has a connection to identity. John Grady, as we will see in the events of this section, now understands that it's foolish to give things a spirit or an identity. In the end, blood is just blood, and we will talk plenty about it in this section, starting with the knife fight. So, looking at a bit of the earlier parts of this section, we have John Grady's comments about the captain inhabiting another space. We talked about him as sort of like the irreconcilable event, right? The captain presenting murder as a choice, something he is elected to be a part of, and becoming a member of a subspecies, a lesser part of the larger species of humans. John Grady's narration separated him from the captain. It provided some comfort. And that idea that once you murder somebody, you can never go back, it is a permanent distinction. Perez also tells John Grady, leading up to this section, that he wants to know what the world wants to know if he is brave. And we know that Perez has a similar view to the captain. People prove themselves through their courage, their willingness to draw blood and violence. The knife fight, then, that happens at the beginning of this section, becomes a moment in which John Grady proves himself through violence, where he enters the world of the subspecies in which he identified the captain to be a member. This is going to change his character. It's going to change his person. He's never going to be able to return to the person he once was. But we are getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, so let's talk about the knife fight, right? John Grady enters the cafeteria. He has been warned of this moment, and he sits down at a table with one other person there. He notices on that person the tattoos he has, a gang tattoo, that this person is eating alone. It is a reminder of some of the standards that are at play in the prison. John Grady also in that moment recognizes the reality of his situation. He knew why this person was eating alone, that it was too late to rise again. As this is all happening, he's hearing doors close. He's noticing the guards are gone. He hears sounds from outside of the prison, and he realizes that he wouldn't have been able to hear those things if the normal noise of the cafeteria were happening. His heart pounds. His food tastes like ash. The sensory details McCarthy uses here, especially sound, are used to create this eerie, empty mood from John Grady's perspective. We begin to realize that the silence within these walls is a sign that something's going to happen. And what happens was the beginning of the knife fight. John Grady sees it all happening immediately. At first, this section lacks emotion. It is pure instinct. It's survival. John Grady is watching things happen. He is seeing things in slow motion almost, right? Where the boy slices the tray at his head. John Grady sees it all unfold slowly before him. Then we have a moment where the wording, specifically the diction around pronouns, creates a sense of chaos. It's hard to see things clearly. It's hard to keep things straight in this moment when the fight begins. If you think about it like any fight, a fight in the cafeteria or whatever the case may be, you hear the noise, everybody looks around to see where it's coming from. You're sort of getting your bearings while it has all started already. We see this specifically in the use of the word he. Throughout this passage, we see the use of the word he coming up. And we're not sure which of the fighters are being referred to. We don't know if McCarthy is referring to John Grady or the other knife fighter. This chaos makes it hard to see things clearly, to keep things straight. The knife, really, is the only thing here that's described with any sort of specific specificity. It's the only thing that sort of stands out in the fight. Finally, once John Grady gets his bearings, he noticed that the knife fighter seems surprised. Our use of character names here are started to differentiate a little bit, and John Grady is able to get his feet under him. The fight slows down a little bit. Both sides get their footing. We gain sight lines, and the knife fight starts to become something that has more of a definitive feature to it. And the most definitive feature of this knife fight is the presence of blood. Blood emerges as the fight begins, and as we saw before, that blood is symbolic of experience, of violence, of what all these characters told John Grady equates to proving yourself. John Grady immediately sees that the knife fighter is bleeding from his face while John Grady is bleeding from his mouth. Both fighters have begun to prove who they are. The taste of blood is a trigger to John Grady's thoughts, and it immediately makes him think that he could die in this place. We see a little bit more of the he pronoun here to create some of that chaos in the moment. And the fight goes on. John Grady gets a few shots in, but ultimately he is getting the worst of it. And so he feigns and fakes surrender. This is his ability to defend himself. He pretends like he is done, and when the knife fighter goes to kill John Grady, he fools him into stabbing above his head from his knees into the heart of the knife fighter. He's able to defend himself, and it comes at the cost of committing murder, of joining the captain in that subspecies of murderers. John Grady becomes a part of what is referred to as the malign history of violence. Now, the blood is much heavier after this moment in the fight. We see an arterial, bright blood that comes from the knife fighter's heart. It is described as a boutonniere blossoming. If you think of like the flower you would wear on your lapel at prom or something, right? A flower blossoming, typically that's a sign of birth. And this is, in this case, a birth of John Grady, the new man, the knife fighter, John Grady, the murderer. But there's another bit of imagery here as well, where this violence and death is coming from that birth. John Grady's clothes begin to weigh heavy with blood. His hands are sticky with blood. Blood is pouring through his fingers as he holds his wounds, almost as if John Grady is trying to keep the blood within him and preserve who he was before this fight. Ultimately, he can't. The blood leads to his tracks, and he leaves wet tracks of blood behind him, almost like symbols of his past. He also leaves handprints later from his blood in his handprints. These are all symbols of his past sort of following him and the imprint he has made, an indentation kind of on this world after the fight. This leads to John Grady going to kind of a hospital ward. He sleeps. He wakes at first after the fight in just total darkness, a symbolic rock bottom. He has a sense of purgatory here, right? He's seen the heaven of the ranch at Purissima. He's seen the hell of prison, and he sort of feels a presence there in this room with him, but nobody's there. We can sort of see this as John Grady's former self sort of lingering. It hasn't left him yet. It's still with him, but it is no longer. And John Grady says he feels the surge of sorrow like a child. This is on page 203, sorry. And at once he began a new life. John Grady, no longer that child who feels the sadness, but is becoming a new life. His life as an adult, his life as somebody who has committed the act of murder that cannot be taken back. John Grady feels a lot of pain. It is a pain that is kind of meaningful now, though, and it's pushing him forward. There's a moment where his suffering brings him closer to his father, and he starts to wonder about the harsh realities of his life, his father's life, and John Grady's own life. He thinks of horses at times. These are things that make sense to him, that bring him no pain. As he prepares to leave, he thinks of what might have occurred, what might be occurring, and what was yet to occur, yet to come. And as John Grady ponders on these moments of what occurred, what is occurring, and what is yet to occur, we see him sort of reflecting on the past, the present, and the future. He's reckoning with himself. He's reckoning what happened with Blevins. He's worried he will be taken out to the compo and shot. And then so he sort of polishes this tray to get a look at himself. We know self-reflection is a metaphor. Looking in a mirror is a metaphor for self-reflection. John Grady's self-reflection, he sees a maimed and raging jinn. This is a harmed and injured and angry spirit in his reflection. As he peels away the bandage, he sees the scars on his face. And the scars are memories. They are reminders of the past that he's experienced. What he doesn't see, however, is he doesn't see himself, and he definitely does not see the previous version of himself that is no longer. John Grady is released, and there is a gray rain. A bell is tolling. We have seen the bell again. Remember for whom the bell tolls, a signal that someone or something has died. It is gray in the streets. It is gray and rainy. This is kind of a callback to those early scenes in Texas in part 1, where there was no color, especially around the funeral scene at the very, very beginning. Again, McCarthy sort of bringing back events from the past to sort of allow the reader to compare the early John Grady to the John Grady now. We also have this total grayed out setting, which is a fall crop from the Purísima Ranch, right, where all of the colors and the golden haze was present. However, I think we can also fairly say that this is a cleansing rain in this case, and it's sort of hinted at by that bell that is ringing. The bell signaling that the death of John Grady's former self is there, and that his romantic notions have begun to fade, and that he is sort of reborn, in a sense, in this newer version of himself. He says in reflecting with Rollins that Rollins says, all my life I had a feeling that trouble was close at hand, not that I was about to get into it, but just that it was always there. And we see that Rollins is sort of coming to terms with his romantic notions, and John Grady also knows this. He's not one to challenge Ned at this point. There's a scene where they're looking back at the prison. They're watching the street. There are women there. There is no sun. As they look back to the prison is described as some site of a siege in an older time, in an older country, where the enemies were all from without. The prison no longer a place where John Grady inhabits, but it is kind of a symbol of that previous self of him, his former romantic self, a romanticist who is kind of under attack from all sides from the world and the world's reality. So romantic notion is something he was trying to protect while under siege from reality. The Mexico John Grady had originally entered is clearly no longer. His defenses have fallen. His romanticisms around Mexico have fallen. Evil has entered, and the enemy now is more residing within himself. His romantic notions were attacked by the enemies outside, but now he's dealing with the realism, the enemies from within. Then I think it's worth exploring a moment earlier in the section and a section towards the end of part 3. John Grady talks about earlier in the section purchasing the knife. And when he purchases the knife from the Batistas, he looks at it as if the complexities of this piece of business, of buying the knife, dragged after it every sort of consequence. The clear implication, the idea of Chekhov's gun, sort of, if somebody shows a gun early, it has to be shot later in the story. Once John Grady buys the knife, he's going to have to use that knife. He's learned that he has to be ready for anything, even if violence is needed. And when he uses Blevins' money, he knows he uses it, the money from a violent act, for a violent act. His decision to buy the knife leads to a fated future. Once you buy the knife, you're going to use it. And the consequences are highlighted in this passage, emphasizing sort of a cause and effect. We see the effect later on when John Grady is talking to Rollins. Rollins gives John Grady an opening in the hotel to talk, in the cafe, to talk about this murder if he wants to, and John Grady's not really ready to do it yet. Rollins is a little bit more open to look at fate. He's looking at some of the sins that they have committed, the sins that led them to the hospital, the punishment in prison, and sort of the role of fate. And he kind of explores this question of like, if you are fated to sin and you are fated to suffer the punishment through that act of fate, what responsibility resides to him? If these were events that were a larger power beyond his control, how much responsibility should he claim? How much responsibility is there for him to take on? Now, Rollins is more comfortable with realism and the reality of the situation. John Grady, not so much, but he is beginning to accept his reality. And he says to Rollins, I never thought I would do that. I never thought I would kill somebody. And Rollins says, look, you didn't have a choice in the matter, but still, John Grady never thought he would do it. Rollins says a very true thing. Look, if you didn't kill him, he would have killed you. And John Grady just says, look, you don't need to try and make it right. It is what it is. John Grady here is beginning to accept reality. It is wrong to murder people, but it had to be done. And in doing so, John Grady has joined the ranks with the captain. He is divided from the rest of humanity and lumped into this subspecies of people who are murderers. He takes responsibility in a very emotionless acceptance of what he's done. And we get the sense here, as he says, that he knew what he was going to have to do when he bought the knife. He emerges almost from total darkness and alights on this point of him accepting when he bought the knife that he was going to probably have to use it. In the end, his innocence is sort of lost in this moment. He's never going to be able to reclaim that innocence. And in this comment of it is what it is, we see ultimately also the reality of Mexico is what it is. It is not what they thought and imagined it to be. It is what it is. It is the reality of the situation. John Grady has changed now. He's a grown figure. He has fewer of the romantic notions, certainly no romantic notions about Mexico, the idea of being thieves in the night and on the run, all these ideas that he entered the country with. It shows that his character has changed to a great degree, especially in regards to his feelings towards Mexico. We also get the sign that Duane Alfonso was the one who paid to get them out of prison. John Grady mentions that she was the one to do it. Again, on 209 is the mention of the word she, a key word. We've talked about the significance of she as a pronoun being used for adversarial roles for the women in John Grady's life. He used it when referring to his mother early on when she wouldn't sell him the ranch. He used it in reference to his original ex-girlfriend, Mary Catherine, when he just referred to her as she. When he first meets Alejandra, he even refers to her as she, and it opens up the door for the fact that she may be a bit of an antagonistic feature in his life, even when he is madly in love with her. Here, Duane Alfonso is referred to as she, and it sets up the role that she plays in his life as well. John Grady is able to put the puzzle pieces together. He understands once he gets the money from Duane Alfonso, it has to do with Alejandra, and he is able to accept this harsh reality. Ultimately, Rollins is ready to go home. He is maybe ready to return to his old life, and he says, the only thing I really hate is I hate showing up to the house like this. Rollins knows that John Grady isn't going to return home with him. He's going to go back to the ranch. But both characters can't come back from what they experienced. They will be changed. They will be unable to return to the person they once were. Rollins has to go back home. He has no need to return to the ranch, but he also knows his friend John Grady will. He's going to go for the girl, and as John Grady says, for the horses as well, almost as if they were an afterthought. We see that John Grady is going to go whether Rollins tells him he should or he shouldn't. He knows he shouldn't, but John Grady's going to. Ultimately, John Grady has to finish this quest on his own. Our characters feel so much older now in this moment compared to their joyous, innocent selves when they were departing originally, when they were crossing the border. And in this moment, sort of as they leave the prison and begin to separate their lives and carry on, we see that they go out and buy clothes, they buy new things, and this word new is repeated throughout. They buy new clothes, they buy new hats, they're going to Nuevo Laredo, right? The emphasis here is on their new lives, their rebirth. As this is happening, it is also raining. This is a cleansing rain, and these new clothes are proving a type of rebirth. We have a little bit of biblical imagery later on as John Grady departs on the truck, emerging from a place where God does not exist as a new person. Ultimately, the boys part, and it is a separation and a division that exists between them. Rollins hops on the bus. He takes a seat John Grady was not expecting him to take, and we see that they are no longer aligned in thought, even when it just comes down to the bus selection. They are different characters here. The events here have created a separation between them. Rollins heads home. John Grady leaves with a scar, a reminder of his past. He is told by the doctors that remove it that it will fade, but it will never go away, nor will the memories of what he experienced. One thing I want you to think of as you develop some thoughts on this section is to what degree the knife fight functions in developing the meaning of the work as a whole. We've talked about different ideas in relation to this, ideas in relation to romanticism versus realism, ideas related to a Bildungsroman, to a coming-of-age story, to the setting of Mexico, to the role of violence. All of these ideas can be brought into thematic elements and thematic ideals as you conceptualize the meaning of the work as a whole. I'm going to ask you to come up with a question here at the end of the video. We'll start class off with some of the better questions, and we'll enter our discussion in that way. Looking forward to talking to you next class.